Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of this podcast that I haven't come up with a name yet. I'm your host, Shangguan. So in this first episode, I want to talk about why I decided to quit my job and come to Korea to study Korean. My career language learning journey started in high school. In the United States, you have to pick a second language in high school, and at that time, the choice is Japanese, Korean, and Spanish. And out of the three, I only watch Korean dramas regularly, so I picked the language where I had the most exposure. Even though this sounds like a naive reason, now looking back, I'm glad I did that because if you don't have an immersive environment, you are never going to learn a language. And I'm glad that I kind of stumbled upon Korean in that way. So through the selective class, I learned the pronunciation and basic grammar of Korean, and I really loved the way Korean language sound. You know what I mean? So I remember one exercise we did in high school is our teacher let us say the word ka, which basically means go. And he let us say the word and in the meantime wave your hand to the classmate sitting next to you and basically ask them to go ka. And it was just so vivid with the sound of the language. And this is even more true when I came to Korea, that my Korean friend would say to me, let's go to the gym together. And he would say, 빡세게 운동합시다. And it's just that 빡 sound, even without any context, even if you don't speak Korean, you will realize the power of that word. Hey, let's fearlessly working at the gym together. And speaking of the Hangul, which is the Korean alphabet system, the Korean alphabet system is just so cute. They have all those circles and squares. I showed my dad once of my Korean essay and he commented, my Korean handwriting is even better than my Chinese handwriting with all those squares and circles in shape. It kind of put my handwriting in a more structured way. So that's my first impression of the language itself. It's just very vivid and cute. So I continued to study Korean when I entered college. And that's when I start to really get the meaning of the words. Because my Korean teacher was really good and she even speaks Chinese. So she can often explain the hanja behind the word. So when she said the word 사랑, it actually means 思量 in Chinese, and it means miss you, which translated to the Korean ways of saying love you. Isn't that so sweet? And I was really stunned because Chinese or Mandarin was my native language, but I never used the way 思量 in that way. Like it just sounds so elegant, and it probably comes from some ancient Chinese that people no longer use nowadays, but it's still integrated into the Korean language system and they still use these so often nowadays. Like even if you don't understand Korean, you must have heard once in your lifetime, 사랑해, 사랑해. And I also remember one time when our teacher was trying to explain the respected way of saying somebody passed away. Instead of saying 죽었어요, you should say like 돌아가셨어요. And it basically means someone turned their back and left. When she explained the meaning of the word, it really made me imagine that scene, that my grandma turned her back and left. So I think that's the moment where I feel like the language is touching my vein. And I had to learn more about the language in order to really get the meaning behind the words. But as you know, life happens. Korean or language learning was not my main focus at that time. I had student loans to pay after graduation, so I had to look for a job, and language learning really takes a lot of effort, like daily efforts. It's like exercising. If you don't put in work one day, maybe you will be able to work your way around it. But if you don't practice for a week, then the whole world would know. It's not until I started working full-time and I had more flexibility to manage my own time and resources that I decided to pick up Korean again. And I started with talktomeinkorean.com. They have a lot of really great resources and it's easy to pick up because their grammar lesson feels more like a conversation rather than a lesson. So it's easy for me to take one lesson a day and slowly pick up the speed. And I did took the topic 1 test and passed after studying for 1 year or 2. Of course, along the way, I met some Korean friends and they would take me to those traditional Korean restaurants where they had all kind of side dishes, so-called banchan, and patjeong, the seafood fried pancake, and sundubu as Chinese living in the US. The most frequent restaurant I went to are Korean restaurants, not Chinese restaurants, because they are so affordable and they come with side dishes. And I also got a taste of shige, which is the rice drink, when I went to a Korean church with my friend for Thanksgiving. So all of those just made me want to devote myself more into the language. And after I left my job in tech consulting, I thought about what I want to do. I learned this technique from Jeff Bezos, where he said, if you are not sure about what to do, like your life goal in general, just imagine you're already 80, 90 years old. And looking back on your life, what would you regret the most? And instead of waiting till later, do it now so that you don't lament in your 80s that you wish you had done this when you were young. When I saw this in Jeff Bezos' autobiography, I thought about what I want to do, and it turned out Korean learning is on my top bucket list. And part of the reason is because a few years ago when I went on New York for a trip, I met this guy on a cruise, and he mentioned he studied Spanish. He dropped a random comment that says, I don't want to be those dumb Americans that can only speak one language. And he didn't say this to offend anybody. He was just trying to emphasize his own determination to fully master Spanish. And he said he did it in college when he went there and he stayed there for 3 months in Spain. He doesn't talk in English at all. He forced himself to fully speak Spanish the whole time, and he was able to speak it fluently nowadays. But when I heard that comment, it feels like he was stepping on my toe. I was the kind of Americans he was talking about. Like, I learned Korean when I was in high school, since high school, and it's been a couple years and I still can't even use the language in a daily life. Like, if I came to Korea, I won't be able to survive without translator. So he didn't mean it, but I took it intentionally, and that comment still is sitting with me today. The other part of the reason is I feel like I have imposter syndrome growing up in an immigration family. I immigrated with my parents together to the US when I was in high school, but at that time I was still an adolescent, so all the adult stuff I let them handle it, and I basically just took their efforts for granted. And even though people say, oh, you are an immigrant, you are able to speak both Mandarin and English, I still have imposter syndrome because I feel like I didn't proactively do all those by myself. I just did it because I was put in that environment. And I really want to do it one time in my life, fully conquering a language. I want to be able to watch Korean dramas without subtitles, read Korean books in that most authentic flavor, no translation. And I want to prove just to myself, not to anybody else, that I was able to do it. I was able to land in a brand new country, doesn't know anybody, doesn't know anything, pick up the language, adapt to the culture, and survive and thrive. Yeah, so that's why I decided to come to Korea and study the language. And honestly, once I came to Korea and really started the language school, I feel like language skills are so underestimated. People always say, oh, we have ChatGPT now, we have all those translators. Language is, useless and it takes so much efforts to learn. But honestly, it's just like an excuse. All the people who said you can use AI, but it's so different. AI is like a walker. You can use translator when you go to the convenience store and buy a drink. And I've also seen foreigners living in Korea doesn't speak a single line of Korean. They don't even know how to check out. But without fully speaking the language, you lost the communication part. And all the essence of language is in the exchange part. If you are not speaking with anybody else, you're just speaking to yourself, then the language is not really a language. So much information is condensed in the exchange part of the language, and you will never be able to get that part with a translator. I'm just saying that. Another fun thing I realize is a lot of this nation's history is also embedded in the Korean language. There's a term called Konglish, which basically means how Korean uses English words in their daily life and they adapt them. So like fork, they say poker. Chicken, they say chicken. And weightlifting, they just say weight training. So you can see how it's heavily influenced by English or the Western countries. And going further back in history, Korean was colonized by Japan for 35 years in the World War II era. They actually just celebrated their Kwangbokjeol, their National Liberation Day of Korea, on August 15th. So you can also see that national trauma in their language. Even Koreans themselves joke that they're the sandwich countries. They're this small little island that's trying to juggle between China, between Western world, between Japan, which at that time was really powerful. But they didn't surrender, When Japan colonized Korea, and I learned this in the National History Museum of Korea, they forces Korean kids to speak Japanese only, and they banned Korean. Even that kind of cultural annihilation didn't destroy the nation. And that kind of national personality is also embedded in the language. So now, after I learned the culture and the history of Korea, every time I'm speaking the language, I feel like I'm getting energy from it, if that makes sense. Merely speaking the language itself gives me so much power and energy. If you go to the subway and you scan the card on the machine, the turnstile in Korean is called kejargu, and the word actually came from Japanese. And the Japanese word uses hanja, but they use Chinese characters in a different way that Chinese don't even use. So one word is like a leaf, and I feel like as I'm picking up those words or trying to remember them, I started to look up and I saw a whole tree of how this language and this nation, people living in this country, survived and flourished over the years, over the long rivers of history. I'm down the rabbit hole of language learning. And after I came to Korea, I picked up more than the language. I also picked up a lot of their personalities. I'll leave that to the future episodes. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to this. If you like this content, please subscribe or like or share to your friends. Thank you very much for your support. See you next time.